The last page the room was silent, save for the rhythmic tapping of keys. Amelia sat hunched over her desk, her fingers moving with mechanical precision. The glow of the monitor illuminated her face, casting sharp shadows that made her look more gaunt than she was. Outside, the world was wrapped in the stillness of midnight, but inside her small apartment, the air felt heavy, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. This was her final novel. After years of crafting tales that danced on the edge of terror, Amelia had decided to end her career with a masterpiece, a horror story so bleak, so unrelenting, that it would leave her readers breathless. She had poured everything into it, her fears, her doubts, her darkest imaginings. The story followed a nameless entity, a force that consumed everything in its path, leaving behind only silence and ash. It was a tale of endings, of the collapse of reality itself. At first, the writing had been easy, detached. She had always been able to keep her work at arm's length, to treat her characters as mere constructs of her imagination. But as the chapters piled up, something shifted. The words began to feel heavier, as though they carried a weight she couldn't explain. The entity she had created, once a vague and shapeless idea, seemed to grow sharper in her mind, its presence more defined. She dismissed it as the natural immersion of a writer in her craft. Then the nightmares began. They started subtly, almost innocuously, a shadow moving in the corner of her dreamscape, a whisper that she couldn't quite make out. But as the nights passed, the dreams became more vivid, more oppressive. She found herself wandering through desolate landscapes. The ground beneath her feet cracked and lifeless. The air was thick with ash, and the sky was a swirling mass of black and crimson. And always, in the distance, she could feel it, watching Hertha entity. It never spoke, never moved, but its presence was suffocating, a weight pressing down on her chest until she woke, gasping for air. Amelia tried to shake it off, to focus on her work, but the dreams clung to her, their imagery bleeding into her waking hours. She began to notice things, small, unsettling details that she couldn't explain. The faint smell of burning wood in her apartment, though nothing was amiss. The way her reflection in the mirror seemed to linger a moment too long after she turned away. The sound of faint whispers when she was alone, just on the edge of hearing. And then there were the coincidences. One night, after finishing a chapter in which the entity consumed a small town, she awoke to a news report of a fire that had razed an entire village in a remote part of the country. The details were eerily similar to what she had written: the blackened earth, the absence of survivors, the strange symbols scorched into the ground. She told herself it was just a coincidence, but the unease gnawed at her. The next chapter brought another nightmare. This time, she dreamed of a city collapsing into itself, its buildings crumbling like sandcastles under an invisible force. When she woke, her phone buzzed with an alert. A massive sinkhole had swallowed part of a downtown district in a city she had never been to. The images on the news were almost identical to the ones she had described in her manuscript. Panic began to set in. She tried to stop writing, to put the story aside. but the pull was irresistible. It was as though the words were demanding to be written, forcing themselves through her fingers and onto the page. She couldn't escape it. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the entity, felt its presence growing stronger, closer. The line between her fiction and reality blurred, and she began to wonder if it had ever existed at all. Her apartment became a prison. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker, as though they were reaching for her. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She stopped sleeping, her nights spent staring at the monitor, her hands trembling as she typed. The story was nearing its end, and with each word, the world outside seemed to unravel a little more. Reports of strange phenomena filled the news, unexplained disappearances. Entire regions plunged into darkness, the sky taking on an unnatural hue. Amelia's mind fractured under the weight of it all. She no longer knew if she was writing the story or if the story was writing her. The entity was no longer confined to her dreams. She could feel it in the room with her, a cold, oppressive presence that made her skin crawl. It whispered to her, its voice a low, guttural hum that resonated in her bones. "Finish it," it seemed to say. "Finish the story." And so she did. The final chapter poured out of her in a frenzy, her fingers moving faster than she thought possible. The words blurred together, her vision swimming as exhaustion and terror consumed her. The entity's whispers grew louder, a deafening roar that filled her mind. She wrote of the end, of the entity consuming the last remnants of existence, leaving behind only silence and ash. When she typed the final word, the room fell silent. The air was still, the whispers gone. For a moment she thought it was over, but then she felt it a shift, a ripple in the fabric of reality. The monitor flickered, and the shadows in the room deepened, coalescing into a shape that was all too familiar. Amelia stared at the screen, her breath hitching as the words she had just written began to fade, replaced by a single line. Asterisk, asterisk, the story is complete. Now it begins. Asterisk, asterisk, the entity stepped forward, its form impossibly dark, its presence overwhelming. Amelia tried to scream, but no sound came. The last thing she saw was the monitor, its glow swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Outside, the world began to crumble.